Hi everyone, my name is Erin Meyer. I'm the Sustainable Food Programs Coordinator at the University of California, Merced. Happy Nutrition Month. Today we're going to celebrate it with Pamela. We're going to talk all about nutrition and health and food and maybe apples and guava and grapes. So if you have questions for Pamela, we can just put them in the chat or you can raise your hand. We also had a few that came in via the registration site. So we can dive in with Pamela if you want to just do like a brief intro of yourself and maybe your work.
Sure. So, well, I've been in the field of nutrition since I was an undergraduate in college, which was in the 1980s. And I've always seen myself in the field of nutrition education. And I define nutrition education, as is the field, very broadly in terms of any kind of activity that is hopefully going to inspire people to want to eat well and also build their confidence that they can, as well as to build supportive environments. I am a professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, and there I teach several courses. One is nutritional ecology, and that is with somebody named Joan Gussow, who's actually is 93 years old right now and has been teaching this course since 1970. So she has just really watched our food system change and the consequences of those changes for our health, for equity, for sustainability of the planet. And so it is really a great course, and I feel very honored that I get to teach it with her. And then I teach another course called Food, Nutrition, and Behavior that was actually taught by Joan a long time ago, and then by somebody named Isabel Contento, and is all about why we eat what we eat. So it's a very broad survey course. And I taught community nutrition for many years, a research course for many years, and now also teach a course called Strategies for Nutrition Education that is all about how nutrition education combines together nutrition science with psychology and education and communication for how it's delivered. So, and most of my research is with schools and food and nutrition education in schools. That includes cooking and gardening and food justice and many other topics, as well as healthy school meals, and even better when those two get integrated together.
Wow, so many things I can first touch on. So you mentioned like the behavior of eating and everything, and I've been vegan for quite a few years, and I'm wondering, what is it behind the appeal of meat and everything? Why are people so hooked? I recently read this book called Meat Hooked, and it was a fascinating discussion on why we're literally, like, as a society, kind of addicted to meat. And I would kind of love your perspective on that. Why is it so hard for folks to go meatless Monday or vegetarian when we know that like there's supreme benefits in terms of environmental, economic, and also just for our health and socially?
What a great question to get us started on. And actually, I have not read that book, so I would be very interested on the perspective of that book. But what I would say is, and I think it's worth me sharing. I was an extremely picky eater as a child, and one of the things that I didn't like was meat. And then I started liking more foods, such as vegetables, when I started studying nutrition. So I eat meat occasionally, but like it's not something I enjoy or I've ever had that allure towards it. So I feel like I'm speaking more from what I know than my personal, which is just I think that's worth sharing. But I think that there's so many cultures where meat is seen as the center of what is eaten. It is seen as something that it tends to be more harder to come by and more costly, which gives it a sense of an allure about it. And I think for a lot of cultural dishes, not that they cannot be adapted to make them meat free, but I think that meat is a part of those dishes. I also think that there's many cultures outside maybe of the United States where meat and fish is used as a flavoring more so than actually as a substance to eat. And so that also makes it just feel like it's an integral part of what people are eating. I then think because it has that place, then when we find ourselves in a situation like we are in the United States and other parts of the world, where all of a sudden we have, to the detriment of our planet and our health, have figured out these crazy ways of producing a lot of meat, it's then people don't realize that has shifted in the system. And all of a sudden it is much more readily available, where it used to be such a small part of the diet, that I think it then, because of the allure, creates new habits that people then just want to eat it. And, honestly, I think sometimes they're just not even conscious of the fact that they may be eating much, much more meat than, say, their grandparents ate, because their grandparents grew up at a different time when the food supply was different, but not realizing it and thinking that they are just following the traditions of maybe their culture. What I think people are also highly, highly unaware of, unless you are living near a farm, is the way that meat is being produced now for basically the vast bulk of the meat that is available in our food supply. And I actually think that when people know more about that, I think it changes things. Some of you may remember, and then I'll stop, Erin, but some of you may remember the film Food Inc. that came out quite a long time ago. And one of the scenes in that film that was very memorable was in the chicken facility. And the person had let the film crew in, even though they worked for Purdue, and Purdue had not wanted this to happen. That farmer's name is Carol Morrison, and you can Google it. I'm trying to remember the publication, but there's actually, several years ago, there was a great article about her, and she actually transitioned to she's still producing chicken, but she's producing eggs, and the chickens are out free, roaming around. And so she changed the way she was producing food pretty dramatically after, kind of realizing everything. And I think that's probably why she let it in. But I do think that when there is more uncovered about how we produce meat, I think that can help people to understand it. Perhaps that happened a little bit with the pandemic, when we had, some food shortages, and there was a lot of attention on meat packing plants and all of that. I don't know. I hope that's a helpful perspective, but like I said, that's just from what I know. I'd love to, Erin, if there's anything else in the book or any other areas that they touched on.
Yeah, it was really interesting. They touched on like the power piece of it, like the feminist versus macho piece of it. They touched on some like really interesting psychology. I'm not going to do any spoiler alerts or anything. I'm going to recommend it. I'll send out an update email after this with the recording, and also a link to that book. I highly recommend it. It's pretty fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Does anyone have any questions from the audience? Cool. So I will throw in one. So someone asked, what is something those not involved in policy can do to move sustainable, healthy food forward for all?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think maybe there is two-part answer. One, like advocating for policy, even though you're not involved in it. And then second, of just working with your community. So I would look around to the communities around you and figure out what is available that may be more local and sustainably produced, and figure out what you can do to help to support those initiatives. I know that there's been a lot of initiatives in New York City in communities that would be challenging to have farmers do a farmers market in that community because there is not so much foot traffic. And so therefore it would be hard for the farmers to sell. And so what there's been a lot of attempts to do is then have a hub where several farmers will bring food, and then it is gone out, and there are people that work at the markets in many different markets and will sell the food and then make sure the proceeds get back to the farmers. So that has allowed for many more farmers markets branching out in communities that didn't typically have them, and is also supporting farmers. So it is supporting both the production side through the farmers being supported and feeling like they can bring their food to just that one place, as well as then the people that would like to buy the food being supported because there can be many more farmers markets in different communities. The second is, even if you're not directly involved in policy, we all have a voice in policy, and our voice can be very strong. I can say that the voice that is talking to all of our elected officials, particularly on the federal level, but I think probably on the state and the local level as well, are people that are actually pushing for the large industrial food system, for those animal production systems that I was just talking about. And if those are the main voices that politicians are hearing from, they are going to think that that's what people want. And so reaching out and saying, you care about the connection between how our food is produced and sustainability of our planet. You care about having food that promotes health. And do you think that if you do, and obviously all of this is if you believe this, you do think that the government has a role in helping to create a food supply that will help with sustainability of the planet, help with health, help to create equity, that will actually go a long way, because the other side, the voices are being heard by the politicians pretty loud and clearly. And so you may think, well, I'm just a consumer and I don't like the way that things are, but I don't know what to do about it. And you do have a voice in our political system at every level of government. And that is a voice that I believe that all of our elected officials deserve to hear, because a lot of people think that, but they may not reach out as much.
Great answer. So Bhavneet said in the chat, any thoughts on the nutritional guidelines being influenced by USDA/lobby groups from various industries versus only the Department of Health and Human Services, especially around setting dietary guidelines for the public?
Yes. Wow. I had not even realized how much was in the chat. So that is a great question. So we have, so just to, in case everybody doesn't know this, just very, very briefly, since 1980, we've had dietary guidelines for Americans that are updated, and by law need to be updated every 5 years. So they tend to be updated on the years that end in 0 and 5, and are usually put out at the end of that year. So the last dietary guidelines that came out in December of 2020. There is a dietary guidelines advisory committee that basically reviews all of the science. So whatever was new in nutrition science during those 5 years to then create those guidelines. However, the guidelines end up being heavily influenced by those, once again, who end up commenting and writing in. And a lot of the large companies have basically people that are writing in and writing to the committee and testifying for the committee all the time. So this is another great opportunity to get involved. I know other countries like Canada has done a much better job than the United States of trying to produce dietary guidelines that are truly based in at least health, and not have any industry influence. That has been much more challenging in the United States. I will give you an example. I think at this point in time, and I'm not alone in the field of nutrition, that one of the biggest challenges that we face is that over 60% of our food supply are foods that could be classified as what's called ultra processed foods, which means that they have had the cooking, the foods have been broken down into many different ways. The cooking methods that have been used on them are things that can only be done industrially, such as very high heat or high pressure or other mechanisms. And then there has been a lot of ingredients added as those are put back together into food-like substances. In a middle school curriculum we called those FUDs, PHUDs, instead of food. So food was whole foods, and then FUDs were all of these other products. That's 60% of our food supply, and teenagers, just as an example, are one group that actually it's over 60%. They are eating more than what's the average in the food supply, but that's the average in the food supply. That means that's the average overall that people are eating. Yet in the current dietary guidelines for Americans, the ultra processed foods are not even mentioned. And I hope that will change. There was a big push, the previous one in 2015, to also look at sustainability of the food system, because we need to have a sustainable food system to keep producing foods that will keep people healthy. And that is a very long story, but the short version is that Congress said, this is only about health. We are only doing basically what happens to food once it gets in our body. Forget about everything that happens to food to get it to us, which those of us in the nutrition education community think is crazy. Of course, we have to be thinking about how the food is produced. So that is definitely another way to get involved and to help to say, we want dietary guidelines that are actually looking at the full range of science related to food that is available, not just the nutrition science of what happens to it in the body, and that we want it to address the issues that will really change the food supply to make it healthier for everyone, instead of basically having industry have such a big influence on it.
Great answer. Thank you. And then Susie said, curious if there's info about nutrition levels of hydroponically grown fruits and veg. It would also be interesting if you know about aquaponics. So if there's any info about the nutrition levels for both hydroponic and aquaponic growing systems.
Yeah, you know what? I really don't know how they nutritionally compare, which I think would be really interesting. And I think brings up a really, really important point is when we get the nutrient analyses for any food, whether that's an animal product or a plant product, we are getting that for food that is being produced the way that the industrialized food system produces it, because that is most of the food in our country. So that is the food that is tested. And so we do not know the differences in both plant and animal food when they are produced in different ways, how that is actually affecting the nutrient composition. I think even more important than the vitamins and minerals that we know about that are essential, we are even all of the different, what are called phytonutrients, which are all of the different plant chemicals that are in foods. We actually are at the very beginning of understanding what all of those are and what they all do for us, and how those differ by different growing methods. You know, I'm not even sure if I would say like we should be putting a lot of research into that. I think what is known is that a wide variety of plant-based foods tends to give you a wide variety of those phytochemicals that do seem to be linked to long-term health. And I do not know about hydroponics. There's nutrients put in, but there's no microbes in the soil. And we don't know how the microbes in the soil end up changing the composition of all of those phytochemicals. So I guess that's a very long answer to say the jury's still out. And so I don't know for both hydroponics or aquaponics.
Great answer. Thank you. I've been curious about that myself too. And we know how important soil is. So like removing the soil just doesn't seem.
And I will say, I'm not commenting on whether there is a role for hydroponics or aquaponics in our food supply, But I will say that I actually do not think that they should be labeled organic, because the core definition of organic, and this was what was talked about when the National Organic Standards Board first was meeting in the 1990s, is that it is about stewardship to the soil, and it is about soil based. So goes way beyond just about not using chemical fertilizers or pesticides. It is about the soil. And so, I do not think that hydroponics or aquaponics should be labeled with organic, because I believe that organic should be soil based. Whether or not, like I said, that they could have a different designation, but I do not think that they should be labeled as organic.
How can folks know if it's grown hydroponically versus aquaponically unless they're at a farmer's market buying it direct from the farmer? Is there any sort of labeling around that you know of?
Not that I know of. I mean, I think, if it's some of the big, like say fruit producers, you could certainly look up the company if it's something that you're buying on a regular basis, like some kind of berries or something in a supermarket, and you could probably find out more from the company where they're sourcing from on their website.
Awesome. So then John said, Pam, what do you feel is the most vital nutritional change that needs to be made right now to benefit health and well-being for communities? As in, what's the priority? And yes, more farmers markets and that purchasing power is voice. And I second on USDA guidelines.
Okay. So I really think it's what I said before. I think it is addressing the ubiquity of ultra processed foods, and particularly communities that is truly dominates what is available. And so getting to more equitable access to fresh foods, which could include farmers markets, but may also just include having more of those foods in whatever stores are in communities. So, you've probably all read research that just putting a supermarket in a community may not change things, because the supermarkets, particularly some chain supermarkets, kind of have different people think of them in different ways. I guess more maybe to say specifically is Whole Foods is thought of as a very upper class white supermarket, and some people may not feel welcome there. And so I think it's getting more access to healthy foods in all of the markets that are in communities, and decreasing the ubiquitousness of ultra processed foods, which, by the way, are inexpensive because they are made from corn and soy. That is what is supported in several different ways through our current agriculture bill.
Yeah, corn and soy. I could go on and on about those. So I have a question myself. From your standpoint, what are 3 myths that you would like to see debunked from a nutrition standpoint?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. I mean, maybe one, which I'm not sure if this is a specific myth, but is that nutrition science is changing all the time. The media loves to portray that and loves to, make it seem like, oh, this was good for us last week and is bad for us this week. Basically, there has been decades and decades and decades of guidelines that more whole plant-based foods as the basis of our diet is what is good for our short and long-term health. And I feel like that's not sexy. That's not interesting. It's old news. And so it ends up fading away. And so I think demystifying, yes, there's always new science, but demystifying that everything is changing does, that message does such a disservice to our profession, because it makes people think that it just can't be trusted. So I guess that would be one. Trying to think of myths, and I feel like I'm like I'm trying to think of like things that people have asked me. If anybody has any myth, you could say it out, but
That's okay. If you think of one or two, we can come
Yeah,
back.
that sounds good.
Awesome. All right. So Kelly said, do you see the dairy/animal ag industry as a barrier to advancing nutrition education policies, such as in New York State? Some organizations promoting plant-based diets could help to move forward policies that advance nutrition education and wellness in schools if the nutrition education promotes plant-based diets, but the ag industry may be a limitation. I think a just livestock transition that some global organizations are working on could alleviate some of this pushback. I agree, but let's hear what Pamela thinks.
Yeah, no, I agree too. And I mean, Erin, you said you were have been a vegan for a long time, which is great. And I actually think that if we can have the government support farmers to transition to more mixed farming, I do think that that can help us with both sustainability as well as producing foods that will keep people healthy, as well as supporting our regional food system. I mean, to give an example, I've been a member of a community supported agriculture where you buy a share in the farm at the beginning, excuse me, of the growing season, and then you get a share of what they produce through the whole entire harvesting season for several decades, a very, very long time. And that organization or that farm basically uses their animals to produce the manure to basically produce the vegetables. And because it is such a health conscious group, or what seemingly health conscious group, and meat has gotten such a bad name, they always have a lot of trouble. They do sell meat shares and they always have a lot of trouble selling them. And yet that's the kind of meat we would be wanting people to eat. So I think that goes along with transitioning to other ways of thinking about farming, which would be a big switch. I do know some about, but very little about some European countries are actually putting into their agricultural policies to help support farmers that want to transition to more regenerative agriculture and giving them supports to do that. I actually think that another issue, which is a little aside from what Kelly wrote, but is that the average age of farmers has just continually increased. And so, I believe that we could actually create a new generation of farmers and a new generation of farmers that is doing regenerative agriculture, that is mixed agriculture, and is being supported by the government providing a program that would ease people getting into agriculture who want to do that are young and would also be doing regenerative agriculture, as well as better supporting people of color who want to go into farming, who have actually been disproportionately not supported by our agricultural policies in the past.
Yeah, there's a couple of cool groups that are working on something. It's called transformation, as in transformation, but transformation. I don't remember the animal ag or the animal activism groups. I want to say maybe it was Mercy for Animals or Vegan Outreach, something like that. I'll look into it. But they're partnering with this plant-based cheese company called Miyoko's, I believe, to work on this project. So there are some things going on, which is great.
Somebody just mentioned that to me yesterday. I had never heard of that company. That's so cool that it's coming up again.
Yeah, I'll try and find it because it's kind of bothering me who it actually is, what the vegan group is. But I'll find a link for that.
Okay, that would be great.
I'm just reading the chat here. Let's see. Well, John said, I've seen articles that we've destroyed a lot of the topsoil in the US and it's now nutrient deficient. I've heard the same thing. Is that myth?
Yes, no, that's a good myth. Okay, so that is true. Unfortunately, we have destroyed a lot of our topsoil, particularly in the middle of our country, that actually, well, when white people took over the United States, they basically had amazing topsoil, and it has been very, very, very much depleted. we do not know, I don't think even know all of the consequences. And I'll just tell a very quick story. The woman, Joan, who I talked about, who's now 93 and has been teaching about the food system since 1970, she grows most of her own food on in her backyard, which is on the Hudson River in, just north of New York City. And after a big storm that we had, that some of you may have probably heard of in 2012, called Superstorm Sandy, which completely destroyed her garden, it had to be rebuilt. And two of the beds that they ran out of topsoil. And so they just had to put fill soil all the way to the top. And it was very hard. And she said, oh, it would just kill me to see those beds not have anything on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant sweet potatoes. I don't know if I'm going to get any sweet potatoes from them, but at least sweet potatoes seem to be able to grow in anything, and they get very bushy and green. So at least it will look green. At least it will look good, as I can figure out what to do and get more topsoil and replace it the next year. So at the end, and the sweet potatoes all grew. It was very green, very viney. The plants got very full and looked really nice. And at the end of the season, she said, well, I guess I might as well see, was there any sweet potatoes that grew? And she was ready for the soil to be super hard, because that's what she planted the sweet potatoes in, was a super hard soil. And the soil in that one season had transformed. And she was trying and trying and trying to figure it out. And she finally found someone that said, oh, well, that's a microbe in the soil. And I believe the name of it is globulin. And what globulin does is it ends up helping the soil to stick together a little bit. So it actually softens the soil. And so she researched into it more. And like I said, this was right after Superstorm Sandy. So it was about 2013. She realized that it had just been discovered in 1996. So this microbe in the soil that basically plays this enormous role of making soil soft enough that we can grow things in it, we hadn't even discovered until 1996. We could have been putting something on farmland that would have destroyed that and not even known it, which just shows how little we understand about the microbes in our body, as well as the microbes in the soil, which I actually think probably are interrelated more than we even know too. So I do think that topsoil is an enormous concern, and it takes a very long time to rebuild topsoil. So if we keep decreasing it the way that we are, we're really going to have a very hard time producing food in the future. And not to even mention all of the other changes that are happening due to climate change that will make some of the places where we currently produce food it much harder to produce food in the future.
I'm glad that you mentioned the microbiome, the gut microbiome, because it's vitally important, and I'm not sure other folks know exactly why that is. Maybe if you want to say more about the importance of it and maybe how to boost your gut microbiome.
Sure. Well, maybe to start with that, just like what I said before, is what's been tried and true in nutrition forever and ever and ever. It seems like the best way to have a healthy gut microbiome is to eat a wide variety of plant-based foods, because what ends up feeding or nourishing the gut microbiome is all of the things in those plant-based foods. So that seems to be what helps to have a very diverse and ample gut microbiome. There is plenty of products like probiotics that you can take. What I have heard, and I am certainly not an expert on this, but is what they end up having is the strains that are very easy to reproduce and basically put into a pill or a liquid format, whatever format you're buying it in. And so they may end up having a lot of organisms in it, but it may not be the wide variety that our gut actually needs to be healthy. So it's not just about any amount, it's about the right mixture and the right amount. As far as why it's important, I actually think that it interacts with how our food is digested, how it's absorbed, how our whole entire intestinal tract works, much more than we understand. And I do think that it's a whole other world that we don't understand, just like we don't really understand all of the microbes that are in the soil.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot more to explore. So Rob said, as we move into a new round of congressional work on the Farm Bill, which includes SNAP amounts and regulations, what are your thoughts on limiting or eliminating allowing sugary beverage purchases with SNAP?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. And I will say in my community nutrition class, we would always have a debate on this. And I think it's truly one of the most thoughtfully controversial issues that we have in the field of nutrition. So I think it's very complicated. When I look at it from a lens of thinking about it as a public health person and thinking about it as a food system sustainability person on a broad level, it is frustrating that basically the sweetened beverage industry, as well as maybe other products that have very little nutritive value, are actually being supported by our government program. And so that is very, very frustrating that they are basically getting that support because people are using their money, their SNAP dollars to buy that, and hence it is going to the companies. Yet, when I think about the lives of people who are food insecure, and think about the dignity of people that are using all of our food programs, that's where it becomes much more complicated for me, because it then does feel like it is making choices, as I said before. Ultra processed products, which sweetened beverage fit into, is 60% of our food supply. So certainly people that are paying for their own food are buying plenty of ultra processed products. As a matter of fact, overall, a higher amount of those, it may be a little less of their percentage than people who are on SNAP. And that's only because we have a food supply that those are the cheap calories. So if you're a mother trying to make sure your children have a full belly, you're going to be buying the foods that are the densest in calories that you can on the limited amount that you have. So I do think that that's where it gets very tricky, and can feel punitive and can feel like it is actually taking away some pride and ownership over having choice of the people who are using it. On the other hand, I think that doing some pilots and seeing if people are not buying certain foods on it, that then they would get like extra funding to buy other foods, and more of an incentive program, like what they have for SNAP at farmers markets, which is different in different places in the country. I know in New York City, it's a 40% increase. So for every $5 that you spend on SNAP, you get an extra $2 that you can spend for fruits and vegetables at the farmer's market. So with the $5 on the SNAP, you can buy anything that's at the farmer's market that's SNAP eligible, which is basically anything except for something that would be served hot. But then with those extra $2, you can only buy fruits and vegetables. So I think that more of a incentive program, research that has been done that has education with having some restrictions as well as a really good incentive program has actually worked very well. And so I think, doing something like that, but it's very, very complicated. Like I said, I used to spend, when I taught community nutrition, a whole class session talking and debating all of the different issues.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions from the audience also that are burning questions?
I'm seeing the one that says, I belong to a CSA that uses no-till farming practices. Is this a growing method for CSA or organic farms? I think that this is a really, really great and important issue, is basically tilling the soil, which is turning it over, can actually release a lot of carbon and breaks down the soil and probably is disrupting the microorganisms in the soil in ways that we don't understand. However, for organic practices, one of the biggest challenges is weed control. And a way to control weeds is, since the seeds tend to be on the top, is to turn over the soil a little bit to basically help to decrease weeds. And so there has been a lot of debate over maybe using a little bit of, say, a chemical herbicide, but not tilling the soil. Is that actually better for the environment? And I think we are figuring that out still. And I actually think that that would be something that would be really great to figure out no-till methods that are using either no inputs, no chemical inputs, or very, very few chemical inputs, because that is something, that is a way that we would be looking at what is actually good for farmers, good for the soil, good for the food that we're producing. And unfortunately, things tend to be like one side or the other very often. And I think that this is a really great place where we can say, we want to just be making the best choice that is checking off all those boxes of ecological health, public health, and caring for farmers.
Great answer.
And it is true, sorry, now I'm seeing some of the other questions, that there was waivers that that were to decrease sweetened beverages. There was one that New York City pushed very strong for and was not approved. I will tell you that somebody that was very high up in the USDA in the Obama administration, basically after that administration, said she, in hindsight, wished she had approved some of the waivers because it would have given us really good information. And I think, it could have added to that understanding of what mixture of giving people incentives at the same time as there might be some restrictions, along with education and why that's being restricted, could be very helpful. So maybe we'll get to that point in the future.
There's another question that I want to throw in from the registration that said, what is the Tisch Food Center's current approach to supporting school wellness policy in New York State?
Well, thank you. And basically, for those of you on the call, you may have been aware that we, the Laurie M. Tisch Center for Food Education and Policy at Teachers College, Columbia University, where I work, had a campaign that was supported by what's called Voices for Healthy Kids, which is the American Heart Association and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, that was supporting something called the WELL campaign, which was Wellness, Equity, Learning legislation. And what we wanted to do was have a model wellness policy for New York State, as well as have funding that would help school districts, particularly school districts that were very low resource, be able to do more wellness activities. We still very, very, very much support it and would very much like that to happen, and do not at this point in time have the funding to continue to push it through the legislation. Very sadly, there had been a lot of work done on this all the way through 2019, through the fall of 2019, and it was being worked on in the spring of 20. We had a bill introduced. It actually looked like it was very favorable to get this bill passed. That would have included the model wellness policy, or at least the development of the model wellness policy, as well as at least some pilot money for this funding. And as all of you know, then in March of 2020, New York City became the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, and both the city and the state government that's all they could focus on. And so unfortunately, even though there had been so much traction, it did not get to pass. But we still very much support it, but just are not actively working on it right now.
Thank you. So I know that there's a lot of folks here, a lot of students here from a public health course at the UC. If someone was interested in becoming a registered dietitian or just joining the nutrition field, what are some next steps for them? What advice do you have for them?
Okay, good question. And by the way, Kelly just put in, thank you, Kelly, that there is still active legislation on both a state bill, a state Senate bill and an assembly bill. And she has the numbers in there in case you want to just look them up. And maybe if you want to do that in your state. So if you would like to become a registered dietitian, first of all, how registered dietitians are being trained in this country is changing. And so it is now going to be that people have to have a master's to become a registered dietitian. I believe that pretty much every program will have basically the same set of prerequisites that our program has, which is general chemistry, biology, organic chemistry, biochemistry, anatomy and physiology, microbiology, and statistics. And so if you are interested in becoming a registered dietitian, you should, if you don't have those courses, be looking into taking those courses. If you're currently a student, you could take them wherever you are. If you're not currently a student, you could take them, at other places as well. And then it would be applying to a program. There are many, many different programs around the country. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the ASCEND, which is the accreditation, oh my gosh, now I forgot what it stands for, ACEND, has all of the programs listed. I will tell you, and this is not meant to be a promotion to my program, but one of our faculty members, whose name is Dr. Laura Sporney, twice a month, I think it's on the 2nd and 4th Fridays in the evening, East Coast time, does an information session. And it, is specific to our program, but it also goes over everything you need to do to become an RD. And so I know a lot of people end up listening to that session to get general information, not just to apply to Teachers College, but it would certainly give information about our program as well.
That's interesting. I was considering becoming a dietitian for a while there, and it was up in the air whether they would go the direction of necessitating a master's degree. I'm glad that they are, because I think that that's pretty vital.
Yeah, no, I do too. The other big change, which isn't about preparing for it, but is a big change in terms of getting it, is that now basically during the master's, you will have experiential learning. So it will be integrated into the classes. And for many programs, it's actually shortened the program, because it used to be doing a program and then having to do a dietetic internship. And so our program, just as an example, went from the MS degree being 2 years. Some people even took 3 years to do it, and then a dietetic internship. Now, if somebody is going full-time, it's 2 packed years, but it's 2 years on the calendar, a September through August, 2 years later. And so I think that makes it easier for people, and hopefully will decrease the barriers to entry. Again, it's the same amount of stuff, it's just packed tighter. So there's fewer weeks off during the summer and during the January break, but it works.
So I'm a food waste, I wouldn't say expert, but that's my area of interest and expertise: food recovery, surplus food, things like that. One of the biggest challenges around why we waste so much food in the US, at least, is confusion around date labels. Maybe that's a myth that you can debunk. Like, what are date labels? What do they mean? Do they mean anything? Should we listen to them? And if not, what is your advice for our food safety?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that's a really, really great question. And I think that there is a lot of confusion. There's a lot of different labels. It's like best by, use by, which I think also creates confusion, because sell by. So there's no consistency for different products about what the date actually is: sell by, use by, best by, whatever it is. I will say, I think that there is two different things to look at. I will tell you that I definitely eat a lot of food that is past whatever date is on there, not too far past it, using safety precautions that like extra cooking of it if it's something that can be cooked or something like that, but know that it can be used beyond the date. I think what's trickier is in institutional food settings, where there is a lot of food being served to a lot of people. that is where there can be a lot of waste. And, I think for food safety reasons, then those labels do need to be abided by. And so it is a shame that sometimes that means that a lot of food is wasted. Hopefully most places that are doing institutional food are, doing the rotating and basically first or last in, first, whatever it is, there's a FIFO, whatever it's called, where basically you would put the newest things in the back so that the oldest is being used first. And that would help to do that. But I know that there was a lot of places that when the pandemic started that just couldn't serve food, that then once they got back, there was a lot that was past date and it could not be served in an institutional setting. So I do think that a cleaner system that made it more clear what the dates meant and said, like basically, is this just not going to be at its best? Or is this potentially going to get people sick? First in, first out. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great rule. And I think it applies just to our kitchens too, right? Like put in your new strawberries behind the old ones. Great. So I think it's really important to try and get kids interested in this field and learning about nutrition and food. How can we inspire them?
So I would say with young children, the best thing is hands-on experiences. So if you can get them planting seeds, whether that's actually out in a garden or in, old food containers like milk cartons or something, that they get to plant a seed and watch it grow, that is magical for a child. I mean, just think like it's their plant and they are growing it. And there are just so many stories of how that works. The next thing is experiences actually cooking food. Ideally, and hopefully we are moving at a point where it will be safer, we're moving beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. But when children get to cook and eat together, it is also magical. And they will. My doctoral dissertation was putting more plant-based foods, more vegetables, whole grains, and beans into the school lunch menu. And some of the kids got to cook the recipes in the classroom and then knew it was going to be served in the cafeteria. Some of the kids didn't have any education and some just learned why to eat plant-based foods without any exposure to plant-based foods. And by the way, this was in the 1990s before we were talking about plant-based foods as much as we are now. And the only kids that ate it were the kids that cooked it. So cooking works. As children get older, I think then talking about equity issues, talking about food justice issues is what brings them in. It definitely can be a much bigger motivator, I think, than telling them like, you shouldn't be eating this, you should be eating that, which I think can feel like it's like, they're being told what to do. And teenagers for sure want to be charting their own path. They also don't want to be fooled by the big food companies. And so when you say, yeah, you know what all that advertising is for, is to make the companies rich and make you spend your money on their product, that can be helpful as well. Yes, food justice, food history, food diversity. Great, great, great comment.
So how do you define food justice and food sovereignty? I mean, they're two different terms, but how do you define each?
Yeah, good question. And some people have used them interchangeably. Food sovereignty definitely has been used more with indigenous populations, both and anyone else can add on to this too, but in the United States as well as around the world, to really make sure that traditional food ways are not being taken away, which have been taken away so much by colonization and basically white people's dominance in the world. Food justice is, I think, a little bit broader term that is really making sure that everyone has access to nourishing foods that are culturally relevant and has it in a way that brings them dignity. I mean, other terms are a rights-based approach to food, which is that food should be seen as a basic human right and everyone should have access to it. And there was something else that I was thinking of. Oh, we can also think of it as, but I'm sure you probably all heard of food deserts, but then we can also think of them as food apartheids, which are purposely structurally put into place to keep some people from having access to healthy foods. There is a community or a farmer who started as a community gardener, Karen Washington, that's in the New York City area. And she has a great great article that was in The Guardian about why we should be talking about food apartheid. So you could, I'm sure, find that online.
So John just basically read my mind. He asked, do we have enough seeds in the doomsday vault? I worry about heirloom and food/plant diversity with the way things are going. I was going to ask about the supply chain. Like, you know, we look at all these pictures, and even you could go to your grocery store, you might see less produce. Specifically, I go to our food bank and there's a lot less produce to have to like offer to our folks. So like, should we be concerned? If so, like, is there anything we can do about it?
So, okay, so to start with the seeds and then the supply chain, and I know we're just about at time. So I think that we do have a lot of places that are saving seeds. One of the biggest challenges is seeds don't stay forever. And so you need for all of those different heirloom seeds to basically grow out the seeds every at least couple of years to get then new seeds to replace those. And so I think that that can be very hard to make sure that we are doing that. And so putting more support into that is crucial, particularly when you look at how the biodiversity within any given, you know, like carrots or beets or radishes, how it has gone to fewer and fewer that we are currently growing. The food, oh, there we go. There's the Karen Washington piece. The food supply chain, I think we should be concerned about. I think with what's going on in the world right now in Ukraine, I mean, of course, we've been hearing about the wheat changing, but with people moving around in the literally hundreds of thousands up to millions of people moving around, making sure that we have a system that can get everybody that's in an area enough nourishing food regularly can be really challenging. We saw that when the pandemic started 2 years ago, how challenging it was and how our food supply that people basically ate half of their food out of the house and half of their food in the house. That's why there wasn't any in supermarkets. And then there was farmers dumping food because the only thing they could do is get it to restaurants or institutional food places. They couldn't package it to make it work for grocery stores. So I think we all need to be thinking about that and thinking about it beyond thinking about the profits of companies to just everyone needs to eat every day.
Agreed. I'm a little afraid though. A little afraid. But I don't want to end on a really pessimistic note. So maybe just like rapid fire, like 2-3 quick questions. Favorite cookbook?
Favorite cookbook? Oh my goodness. That is a good question. And I will have to say, like, I feel like I am one of those people that like opens my refrigerator, just like, well, what can I make? But I'm actually friends with Ellie Krieger. And so I love all of Ellie Krieger's recipes and everyone I've ever made. So all of her cookbooks are really great. There's a
How do you
really,
spell that?
Ellie, Ellie, and then Krieger. And she has a bunch of cookbooks. We happened to be in school together, and then our kids went to elementary school together. So we did lots and lots of wellness stuff in the school. But I think her cookbooks are really great. There's one, oh my gosh, I'm picturing the cover and I can't picture it. Well, there's one that the Wisconsin CSA movement put out that was called apples to zucchini, I think, or asparagus to zucchini. And it basically has all different vegetables and then like 5 or 6 recipes for each. I actually love that one when I'm just like, all right, I have a lot of cabbage in my fridge and I've been making the same cabbage recipes over and over and over. What can I do now? So I think that that's good as well. I hope too that the cookbook industry can survive, because I know many people just Google things online and it's so much easier than having a lot of cookbooks around, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like with journalism. My dad's a journalist, and I'm like, oh no, keep buying the paper, people. Subscribe.
Yes. Yes.
All right, rapid fire. Favorite vegetable?
Favorite vegetable? I would say it changes in the seasons, but right now it's beets.
Oh, let's end on that because I feel like I could think of a good beet joke. I hope you have an unbeatable day.
That's a great one.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you for joining.
Have a great day. Bye.